Here we're going to talk about one of the most important derivative rules, and it's called the product rule, as we see up here. So when we think of the word product in math, what does that really mean? Well, that is the answer to a multiplication question. We call that the product. So when we're applying the product rule in terms of derivatives in calculus, we want to apply it when we see two different functions of x multiplied together, because the product is the answer to a multiplication question. So I've given an example here. Let's say we have y equals, so some function is the product of two different functions. So I've written that in terms of f of x times g of x. So that could be any function containing an x times another function containing an x. How do we go about that? Well, we know when we're adding multiple functions for derivatives, we can just take the derivative of each one and add up all those derivatives. So you basically just go left to right, and that's fine. It works a little bit different with the product rule, though. And here is how we've outlined it in red. We say the derivative of that combination of functions is equal to f prime of x times g of x plus g prime of x times f of x. Now this looks really, really messy in red, but it's actually quite easy. I like to memorize the product rule in terms of words. So I've written it here. When we want to take the derivative of a product of functions, we say we take the derivative of the first function times the second normal plus the derivative of the second function times the first. So let's walk through that. We've labeled our first function f of x and our second function g of x within the function basically we want to take the derivative of. So the first thing is take the derivative of the first. So the first is f of x, so that's why f prime of x is the first thing we do, the derivative of the first. Times the second, so that's just times the second normal, so we literally just blind copy this second piece of the function. Plus the derivative of the second, so now we basically do the opposite. We now take the derivative of the second function in line times the first function untouched, so that's a copy again. So we can see that when we notice in our initial function that there's two different functions multiplied together, we can just blind copy two of them. The second one goes as g of x, first one goes as f of x, and they're placed in there. Then you find the derivative of each for these two pieces. It'll make much more sense when we do the example down here. So here's an example. It's a complicated function, and we want to find y prime. Now, there's two ways we could do this. We could actually multiply this out before we take the derivative, like FOIL it, and we'd have four complicated terms. But that would just be complicated terms. We can use the product rule because we see these two brackets are multiplied together. So I'm going to think of this first bracket as f of x, the first function, and the second one is g of x, and it's just f of x times g of x. Now we follow our rule. The rule says take the derivative of the first. Derivative of f of x is going to be 6x plus 4, that's just the derivative of that bracket, times the second normal. This is really easy because we just copy it. We don't even have to take a derivative. Plus the derivative of the second. So now we move over here and take the derivative of this bracket. That's going to be 28x to the 3, because the 4 comes down to multiply the 7, minus 24x to the 2, times the first. Kind of running out of room here, so this is just multiplied here. Times the first is a blind copy. And that's it. So we've now got these two together right here, plus these two together, and that whole thing makes up the derivative. You could, again, multiply this out and simplify, but it's not going to get very nice. So generally when we're just straight up asked for the derivative in a question, we never have to simplify after. It's just follow the rule, show that you know how to take the derivative of different pieces, and put that within the product rule. So hopefully I would recommend memorizing this from a word standpoint. Derivative of the first times the second plus the derivative of the second times the first. It gets really quick, and it lets you sort of keep on track, especially when functions get really complicated and we start building in quotient rules and chain rules along with the product rule in a particular question. Hopefully that was helpful. You can always send us more questions, info@arnoldtutoring.com. Thanks.